It was a peaceful afternoon when Sarah stepped out of the small cafe on the corner of Main Street. The weather was calm, and the sun shone gently, casting long shadows on the pavement. Sarah stood still for a moment, holding the leash of her guide dog, Max. To anyone passing by, it seemed like an ordinary moment. Sarah looked like any other blind woman, quietly making her way home with the help of her loyal companion. But appearances can be deceiving. Max, the dog by her side, wasn't just a regular guide dog. He had a history, one that no one knew about. His calm, steady presence hid a deeper truth, a truth that would soon be revealed in a way no one could have expected. Max wasn't just there to guide Sarah through busy streets and crowded sidewalks. He was there to protect her, and not in the way people might think. He was trained for something much more serious, something most people could never imagine. But Sarah knew. She knew everything about Max's past, and she trusted him with her life. As Sarah took her first steps onto the sidewalk, she could hear the usual sounds of the city around her: people talking, cars driving by, and the occasional honk of a horn. To her, these sounds were her way of navigating the world. She had been blind for many years, but she had learned to trust her other senses. And of course, she had Max, who had been by her side for as long as she could remember. Max was more than just her guide, he was her protector. But no one who looked at them would guess that. To others, they were just a woman and her dog, moving through life one step at a time. But today, things would be different. Today, something would happen that would change everything. As they walked down the street, Sarah could feel the warm sun on her face. She smiled softly, grateful for the calm of the afternoon. Max led her with confidence, his steps steady and sure. He knew every path they took, every turn they had to make. He had been trained for this. But there was something more to Max, something hidden beneath the surface. He had once been a military dog, trained in ways most people could never understand. He had faced danger before, and he was always ready to protect his handler, no matter what. But no one knew this. To the people around him, Max was just a guide dog, and Sarah was just a blind woman relying on him to get home safely. They had no idea what Max was capable of, and Sarah didn't need them to know. She was content with the quiet life they had built together. But little did she know, that peaceful afternoon was about to take a turn that neither she nor Max could have anticipated. As they continued walking, Sarah heard the faint sound of motorcycles in the distance. At first, it was just a low rumble, but it grew louder with every step they took. Max's ears twitched, and Sarah could feel him tense up slightly. She knew her dog well, and she could sense when something was off. Max had a way of sensing danger before it even got close, and right now, he was alert. The motorcycles grew louder, and soon enough, Sarah could hear voices. It sounded like a group of people, laughing and shouting. She couldn't see them, but she could tell they were getting closer. Max slowed down, his body stiffening as they walked. Sarah's grip on his leash tightened slightly. She trusted Max completely, but something about the sound of those voices made her uneasy. Within moments, the motorcycles were right next to them. Sarah could feel the vibrations from the engines as the bikers pulled up alongside her. The loud noise made her heart race, but she tried to stay calm. She had faced moments of uncertainty before, and she knew that panicking wouldn't help. "Hey, lady. Watch where you're going," one of the bikers called out, his voice mocking. The others laughed, and Sarah could feel their eyes on her. She didn't need to see them to know what they were thinking. To them, she was an easy target. A blind woman, helpless and vulnerable, walking alone with her dog. They had no idea who Max really was, and they certainly didn't know what he was capable of. Max stood his ground, his posture tense but calm. He wasn't just a regular guide dog, after all. He had been trained for moments like this, moments when danger was near and he needed to protect his handler. But Sarah didn't want things to escalate. She tried to ignore the bikers, focusing on Max and the path ahead. She hoped they would leave her alone, but deep down, she knew they wouldn't. The bikers continued to circle around her, their engines roaring as they made jokes and laughed at her. "What's the matter, lady? Can't you see where you're going?" another one shouted, and the others erupted in laughter. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept walking, trusting Max to guide her through. But Max was on high alert. His ears were up, and his eyes were focused on the bikers. He wasn't just a guide dog, he was a protector, trained to handle dangerous situations. Sarah could feel his tension through the leash, and she knew that if things went too far, Max would step in. What the bikers didn't realize was that they were messing with the wrong person. Sarah might have been blind, but she wasn't helpless. And Max, her loyal companion, wasn't just any dog. He had once been part of an elite team, trained to protect and serve in ways that went beyond guiding someone through the streets. He was ready for whatever came next, and Sarah knew it. As the bikers continued to taunt her, Sarah kept her head down, focusing on Max's movements. She trusted him completely, knowing that he would do whatever it took to keep her safe. But the bikers had no idea what was coming. Today, they would learn a lesson they would never forget. And it would all start with Max. As Sarah crossed through the peaceful park, the soft crunch of gravel beneath her feet mixed with the distant sound of children playing and birds chirping. The air was warm, and the sun filtered gently through the trees. Everything seemed calm. Sarah, with her guide dog Max by her side, walked steadily, feeling the familiar path beneath her shoes. She could sense the openness of the park around her and trusted Max to lead her through it safely. But as they walked further into the park, a new sound began to creep into the background. It was faint at first, barely noticeable among the usual sounds of the park. The low rumble of engines. At first, Sarah didn't pay much attention to it. It could have been cars passing by on a nearby road, or someone starting a motorcycle. But the sound grew louder, and with each step Sarah took, the rumbling became more distinct. Max noticed it too. His ears twitched slightly, and his posture changed. Sarah could feel it through the leash. Max's movements, which were usually smooth and relaxed, became more focused, more alert. Something was wrong, and Max sensed it before Sarah could fully understand what was happening. The rumbling turned into a roar. It wasn't just one engine, it was several. The noise echoed through the park, breaking the peaceful atmosphere. Sarah's heart began to race, but she stayed calm, trusting Max to guide her. He had never let her down before. Then she heard them. Voices, loud and mocking, coming closer. Laughter, mixed with the growl of motorcycles. Sarah's grip on Max's leash tightened as she continued walking, trying to stay focused. She didn't know what was coming, but she could feel the tension building in the air. Suddenly, the voices were right next to her. "Hey, lady. Watch where you're going," one of the men yelled, his voice full of amusement. The roar of a motorcycle engine followed, and Sarah could feel the vibrations of the bikes getting closer. She couldn't see them, but she knew they were surrounding her, circling like predators around their prey. The bikers revved their engines again, louder this time, as if they were showing off their power. Sarah could feel the hostility in the air. These men weren't just passing through the park. They had spotted her, and now they were making her their target. "Can't you see?" "Oh wait, you can't," another one taunted, laughing at his own cruel joke. The others joined in, their laughter ringing out around her. Sarah felt her chest tighten, but she kept walking, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. She knew they were mocking her blindness, treating her like she was weak, like she was someone they could intimidate without a second thought. Max stayed close by her side, his body tense and ready. His ears were perked up, and his sharp eyes were locked on the bikers. He could sense the danger, and Sarah could feel it through the leash. Max wasn't just a guide dog, he was trained for moments like this, moments where his handler was in danger. Sarah knew that if things got worse, Max would act. But for now, they kept moving forward, hoping the bikers would get bored and leave them alone. But the bikers weren't going anywhere. They were enjoying themselves too much. To them, Sarah was an easy target, someone they could push around without any consequences. They revved their engines again, getting even closer, their laughter growing louder. One of them called out, "Where do you think you're going, lady? You're not lost, are you?" The mocking tone in his voice made Sarah's skin crawl. She tried to ignore them, focusing on Max and the path ahead, but it was impossible to block out the noise, the cruel laughter, and the roar of the motorcycle surrounding her. Each time she took a step, it seemed like the bikers were getting closer, like they were tightening a circle around her. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest, but she kept walking, determined not to let them see her fear. But the bikers didn't care. They were having fun at her expense, enjoying the power they felt over her. One of them rode even closer, the sound of his bike almost deafening as he leaned in and shouted, "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue?" Sarah clenched her fists, fighting back the frustration and fear rising inside her. She had dealt with cruel people before, people who underestimated her because of her blindness. But this was different. The bikers weren't just making rude comments, they were trying to scare her, to make her feel small and helpless. And the more they laughed, the more she could feel the anger boiling up inside her. But Max wasn't laughing. His eyes were still fixed on the bikers, his muscles tense and ready. He wasn't just a guide dog, after all. He had been trained for far more than leading Sarah through the park. Max was a protector, and if these men pushed too far, they would soon find out what that meant. Sarah could feel Max's tension, but she knew he was waiting for her signal. He was ready to act if she needed him to, but for now, they kept walking, hoping the bikers would lose interest and move on. But deep down, Sarah knew they wouldn't. The bikers had chosen her as their target, and they weren't going to stop until they got the reaction they wanted. "Come on, lady. Don't be so boring," one of them shouted, his voice filled with mockery. "What's your dog gonna do, huh? Bark at us?" The others laughed again, the sound harsh and cruel. Max's ears twitched, and Sarah could feel him pulling slightly on the leash, as if he was ready to spring into action at any moment. She knew Max wouldn't bark, he didn't need to. His silence was his strength, and the bikers had no idea what they were dealing with. As the bikers continued to circle around them, Sarah felt a surge of determination. She wasn't going to let them scare her. She had faced challenges before, and she had always come through stronger. And now, with Max by her side, she knew she wasn't alone. These men thought they were in control, but they were about to learn a lesson they would never forget. The tension in the air was thick, and Sarah could feel the bikers' eyes on her, waiting for her to break, waiting for her to show fear. But she wasn't going to give them that satisfaction. Max stood by her side, silent and strong, his eyes locked on the threat. And in that moment, Sarah knew that no matter what happened next, she and Max would face it together. The laughter from the bikers seemed to grow louder with each passing second. Sarah felt the cold, biting wind on her face as she continued walking through the park, trying her best to ignore the taunts that rang out from behind her. They were circling her now, getting closer and closer, as if they were trying to trap her in a corner. The sound of motorcycle engines roared in her ears, each rev louder than the last. The vibrations from their bikes seemed to shake the ground beneath her, adding to the growing sense of unease in the air. Sarah's grip on Max's leash tightened. She could feel the steady pull of his body beside her, his every movement reflecting the tension in the air. Max had always been by her side, guiding her through the world, offering her the support and strength she needed. But today, something felt different. She could sense the danger in the air, and so could Max. His muscles were tense under his fur, his movements more alert than ever. Sarah could feel it in the way he moved, in the way he kept his body close to hers, protecting her without a word. But the bikers didn't seem to care. They were enjoying themselves, clearly entertained by the idea of messing with someone they thought was weak. "What's the matter, lady?" one of them shouted, the words dripping with mockery. "Can't hear us? Can't see us either, huh?" Another burst of laughter followed, and Sarah could hear them getting closer. The sound of their motorcycles revving filled the air, and she could feel the pressure building up. One of the bikers, a tall man with a rough face and a leather jacket, made a move. With a grin on his face, he leaned forward on his bike and reached out. Sarah didn't have time to react before the biker made a grab for Max's harness. He tugged on it roughly, his fingers closing around the straps. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She felt a surge of panic, but then something happened, something she hadn't expected. Max's body went completely still. At first, Sarah didn't understand what was happening. The biker yanked again, but Max didn't flinch. Instead, he stood there, his body rigid, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to release. Sarah could feel the power in his stance, the tension building in his body, as if he was waiting for the perfect moment to act. He wasn't just a guide dog, he was something much more. Max wasn't just protecting her now. He was waiting for the right moment, and Sarah knew that the bikers had just made a very dangerous mistake. "Hey, what's wrong with you, dog?" the biker mocked, pulling on Max's harness again. His voice was full of amusement, but there was a noticeable edge to it now. He was starting to realize that something was off. Max, still perfectly still, was locked onto the biker's every move, his eyes focused and sharp. Sarah felt her heart race in her chest. She had always known that Max was more than just a guide dog, but she had never seen him in action like this. He wasn't just a protector, he was a warrior, trained to defend her at all costs. "Max, stay calm," Sarah whispered softly, her voice trembling slightly. She didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to escalate the situation further. But deep down, she knew that Max's calmness was something more. The bikers were about to find out just how dangerous it could be to push someone and their dog too far. The biker who had grabbed at Max's harness took a step back, a slight frown crossing his face. He wasn't used to being ignored, especially by a dog. But Max didn't respond. He didn't bark or growl. He just stood there, unmoving, his eyes trained on the man's every move. It was as if Max was daring him to try again. And the biker, sensing the change in the air, wasn't sure what to make of it. He had expected to intimidate the blind woman and her dog, but now he wasn't so sure. Another biker, a man with a scruffy beard and tattoos covering his arms, revved his engine loudly, as if to assert his dominance. "Come on, lady. What's your dog gonna do, huh?" he shouted. The others joined in, laughing and shouting, but Sarah could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The tension in the air was thick, heavier than before. She could tell that the bikers were starting to feel uneasy, like they had crossed a line, but they didn't know how far that line went. Max's body remained perfectly still, but Sarah could feel his muscles coiling with power, his every sense heightened. He was ready. Ready to protect her. Ready to defend her. Sarah couldn't help but feel a surge of pride for the dog who had been by her side through so much. She had always known Max was special, but this was something else entirely. He wasn't just a guide dog, he was a protector, a warrior who had been trained to handle situations like this. "Stay calm, Max," Sarah repeated, her voice more steady now. She could feel the strength of Max's presence beside her. He was more than capable of handling this. She just had to let him do what he was trained to do. The bikers might have underestimated them, but they were about to learn a lesson in respect. The man with the tattoos on his arms took another step forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Max. He reached out again, but this time, there was hesitation in his movements. He could feel it now, the change in the air, the tension that had shifted from playful to dangerous. And still, Max didn't move. He just stood there, watching him, his eyes unblinking. Sarah felt a small smile tug at the corner of her lips. She didn't have to do anything. Max was in control now, and he was waiting for the right moment to act. The bikers had no idea what they were dealing with. They thought they were just messing with an easy target, but they had picked the wrong person and the wrong dog. Max had been trained to protect, trained to handle situations like this with calm precision. He wasn't just any dog. He was a military canine, trained for combat, for protecting his handler at all costs. And now, the bikers were about to find out what that really meant. "Max," Sarah whispered, her voice steady. "Let them know who you are." And in that moment, she knew that things were about to change. The bikers were going to learn a lesson they would never forget. The calm before the storm had finally passed, and the storm was about to hit. The tension that had been building for what felt like hours finally reached its peak. The bikers, having underestimated Sarah and Max, were about to experience the full force of what they had provoked. Sarah's grip tightened on her cane as she felt a new shift in the air. The bikers had continued their taunts, but now, the laughter had stopped. The sounds of their engines revving had quieted, replaced by the heavy silence of anticipation. Then, it happened. One of the bikers, the one who had been the most vocal, stepped forward again. His face was twisted in a smug grin as he reached out, his hand aiming directly at Sarah's cane. He had already grabbed at Max's harness, thinking it was all some kind of joke. But this time, he wasn't reaching for the dog, he was going after Sarah. The cold wind seemed to freeze time for a split second as he moved closer, not realizing the terrible mistake he was about to make. Before anyone could react, Max moved. And he moved faster than anyone could have ever imagined. With a speed and precision that took everyone by surprise, Max lunged forward. His body was a blur, his movements fluid and sharp. His teeth were bared, but it wasn't aggression, it was pure, calculated defense. He wasn't just trying to stop the biker, he was responding to a threat, executing a perfect military maneuver, trained to protect Sarah at all costs. The biker's hand didn't even touch the cane. Max's teeth clamped around the biker's wrist, his bite firm but controlled. The biker yelped in pain and shock, stumbling backward. His face drained of color as he looked down at the dog, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What the?" The other bikers froze, their mouths hanging open, unable to comprehend what had just happened. They had thought they were dealing with a defenseless woman and her dog. They had no idea what they had unleashed. The leader of the group, a tall man with dark sunglasses and a leather jacket, stepped forward, trying to regain control of the situation. He was clearly shaken by what he had just seen, but he wasn't about to back down. He squinted at Max, then glanced at Sarah, trying to assess the situation. But Max wasn't moving. He had already positioned himself between Sarah and the bikers, his body tense and ready. His muscles rippled with controlled power, and his eyes never left the bikers. It was clear that Max wasn't going to let anyone come closer to Sarah. Not now. Not ever. For a moment, there was only silence, broken only by the sound of the wind and the distant hum of the motorcycles. The bikers were standing still, unsure of what to do next. The leader of the group, his tough exterior cracking for the first time, looked back at his friends. But none of them were in any position to move. Max had made it clear that this was not a fight they were going to win. Sarah stood there, calm and composed, watching the bikers closely. She had known that Max was something special, but seeing him in action like this was different. This was a side of him that few had ever witnessed, a side that was trained for combat, for protecting his handler at all costs. The leader of the bikers took a step back, his bravado melting away as he assessed the situation. His eyes flicked nervously between Max and Sarah. What's going on here?" he stammered, his voice suddenly uncertain. Sarah smiled faintly, her voice soft but filled with a quiet strength. "You had no idea, did you?" she said, her words cutting through the tension in the air. "Max isn't just any dog. He's a retired military protector. He's been trained to defend me, no matter what. And you really picked the wrong woman to mess with today." The bikers stood frozen, the weight of her words sinking in. The leader's face paled as the full realization hit him. They hadn't just picked on some ordinary woman. They had picked on someone who was connected to a force far stronger than anything they could ever hope to be. Max wasn't just any guide dog, he was a trained military canine, and his purpose was to protect his handler with everything he had. Max remained perfectly still, his body poised and ready, his eyes never leaving the bikers. It was clear that he wasn't going to back down, and neither was Sarah. She knew that Max would do whatever it took to keep her safe. The bikers, still stunned and unsure of how to react, started to back away slowly. They had never expected this. They had never expected to encounter such a powerful force. And now, they were seeing just how wrong they had been. Max's gaze never wavered as the bikers retreated, slowly realizing that they had crossed a line. The leader, now completely intimidated, shot a glance at his friends. The smugness that had once filled his face was gone, replaced by a look of fear and confusion. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words seemed to fail him. Max, still in position, finally relaxed ever so slightly, but his eyes never left the group. It was a signal that the danger had passed. The bikers had been put in their place, and they knew it. They had no choice but to turn and leave, their heads down, their motorcycles revving weakly as they pulled away from Sarah and Max. As the sound of the bikes faded into the distance, Sarah exhaled deeply, the tension finally leaving her body. She turned to Max, her heart swelling with pride. "You did good, Max," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with gratitude. Max turned his head toward her, his eyes warm and reassuring. His job was done, and he was ready to guide her home. There was no more danger. No more threats. He had done exactly what he had been trained to do. The bikers, now nothing more than a distant memory, had learned a valuable lesson that day: never underestimate someone based on what you think you know about them. They had thought Sarah was just a blind woman with a guide dog. They had no idea that she had a protector by her side, one who had been trained to fight back when necessary. And they had paid the price for their mistake. As Sarah and Max walked away, side by side, the world seemed just a little bit safer, a little bit brighter. They had faced a challenge, and they had overcome it together. And in that moment, Sarah knew that no matter what came their way, she and Max would always have each other's backs. The bikers, once full of bravado and confidence, were now completely rattled. As the realization hit them, one by one, they started to retreat, stepping back in fear and disbelief. The powerful moment had crushed their arrogance, and the truth had been laid bare in front of them. The group of tough bikers, who had thought they could intimidate a blind woman and her dog, now looked like defeated fools. The leader, who had been the most outspoken, hesitated, his eyes darting nervously between Sarah, Max, and the rest of the group. The air was thick with tension, but not the same kind of tension that had been present moments ago, the kind that was filled with fear. The bikers no longer had the courage to continue their threats. Max, still standing firm, didn't flinch. He remained in his protective stance, his eyes alert and unwavering, his focus entirely on the bikers who had crossed a line. But as soon as the bikers began to back away, Max relaxed his posture, though his attention never fully left them. The threat had passed, And the bikers knew it. They were no longer a danger to Sarah or to anyone else. One by one, the bikers started to climb back onto their motorcycles, but their previous confidence was gone. The leader of the group, who had once acted so tough, now had a defeated look on his face as he started his bike. The sound of the engines revving up was no longer the loud, aggressive noise it had been earlier. Now, it was a sound of retreat. The bikers drove off, their heads down, the excitement and mockery that had filled the air earlier replaced by a quiet, nervous escape. Sarah stood still for a moment, letting the dust settle. Max was already by her side, his body relaxed but still alert, his ears occasionally twitching as he listened to the fading roar of the motorcycles. It was as if he was waiting for the bikers to return, but once he was sure they were gone, he finally allowed himself to calm completely. Sarah bent down to gently pat Max's head, her fingers brushing through his fur with affection.